Before AI came into being, most of the consumers and even Hollywood used 3D models for imagery that couldn't actually be created for real, basically sci-fi and fantasy. And so these 3D models were put together as basic shapes, and then we would add texture maps to it, as you can see right here of this spaceship. So we're going to head and add the texture. This is in the preview mode right now, so you're just seeing all the colors and how they apply to this spaceship. Then we would go to the actual final mode for rendering, render mode, and it had some pretty good detail at the end. Most of the 3D modeling companies started to phase out in about 2012. There's still a few around, but of the dozen or so that we used, only about half of them are still there, and they're really having trouble because AI has really taken over. Let's take a basic model with no textures or anything, and we're just going to add the bloom levels to it. Let's just use the very small one, which is the subtle. So it's adding quite a bit of texture at the subtle level. That's amazing what it can do just at that level alone. Let's go back and let's try the subtle level close-up to see how it looks. And in the text line, I told the Bloom to add a few cyan and orange colors in small areas. And so this basically is what happened. Now let's go ahead and take a look at it again at all the different levels. This is the 3D model without anything done to it yet. Let's add the Bloom subtle level to it first. And come on. There's the subtle level. And then we're going to work our way up to low. There's low. Then we're going to go to medium. Medium right there. And finally, we're going to go to high. And even beyond that is the maximum, which I think was a little bit too much. See, it's got too much blooming. Bloom, that's the name of the program. It's got too much blooming. So we're going to stop right there. This model comes from an old program called View, which ended in 2012. And we used it for one of our book trailers. And so just running like a medium level right through the middle of this model, we get a lot of detail, especially in the rocky areas, in the background, the mountains, and then the textures that was on this 3D model, which are pretty plain, just solid colors or a very small amount of textures. This added quite a bit to this model. Get scanning back and forth, add a closer mode. Right there, look at that. Just look at the detail it brings in all the texture panels. All these people that have these models can now revive these models and that they've rendered through their 3D modeling and bring them back as new kinds of images that really have a lot of detail that they never had before. And basically, it's not the same thing as the original 3D model image. It's a completely new one, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a lot better. And so you're reviving all this old stuff that you work with that's now been outdated and replaced it with a new Bloom 3D model. It's really very, very cool. Some of our book trailers required images from the apocalypse, which can't be bought from a stockboard agency unless somebody illustrated it. But we could bring in these 3D models of the apocalypse that we created and basically run this Bloom across it, and it'll change it into a brand new image with a lot more detail in it, and still looks like the apocalypse. There's a few things we have to edit, like some of the signs come out a little strange, but that's not easy to do in Photoshop after the fact, so I don't really worry about it. This one we basically told it to add some skulls and have death a little bit in it to really show the apocalypse. So you'll see it. There was even a guy on the left that we created, added to the scene. So it's all, again, done with Bloom. And these models can run up to $75 or $100 and take a lot of time creating them. And just by taking these renders, no matter how low a resolution they are, we can create a brand new image. Some 3D model sites offer models for free. And so if we take Bloom and render it out, we get this result, then keep increasing the Bloom levels all the way up to max with it. And then eventually running max twice, we get the final result that's really, really nice. Okay, right here, this looks very good from the Bloom application. Then if we go back to the original right there, and then back to the final, and back and forth, you can see quite a bit of difference between the two. Let's take another look at basic modeling. And so here's a real basic free one, and we just let it do what it wanted to do, and it added a bunch of people in, which is sort of strange. You never know what's going to happen with Bloom. A lot of times you have to repeat it, change the settings, maybe from subtle to low to medium high. One of those will work, and I've made a suggestion to them to actually have those rendered all at the same time. Now let's take a look at some low-res models that run about $2 to $10. If we take Bloom and run across it, we'll pick up water underneath the aircraft, and we'll pick up a lot of detail in the canopy and some of the structures that look on top. It's a very, very nice way to take inexpensive 3D models and make them look like very expensive 3D models. So if you've done this, you bought some inexpensive 3D models and you want to make them look a lot better, this is the way to do it with Bloom. Moving on to another model that did not cost too much. We brought it in and we want to add a lot more detail to it, make it quite a look different for one of our book trailers. And it looks really nice by just running a medium across it, medium Bloom, and we picked up a lot of detail, lights, colors, and fittings. Let's take a look at a more expensive model now. We saw that actually at the very beginning of this presentation, the wireframe of it, and we're going to run just a medium level Bloom across it. Now it doesn't look like it changed too much because it already had some pretty good high quality detail, but it does add a little bit more. And the thing is, it changes the render results a little bit. So if you're looking for something a little different than your original 3D model render, you want to see it a little different, you can try all the different settings: subtle, low, medium, high, max. One of them will give you maybe the new model that you want. And like I say, you can restore a lot of old 3D model renders to new images with this Bloom. Sometimes when you try all the different levels of Bloom, none of them work because there's something in the picture that just does not render correctly. Everything worked pretty good except the astronaut laying on the stretcher. No matter what we did, all the different levels, it always came out as a bunch of garbage on the ground. You can see there, look, it's just, there's nobody laying on the ground. So we took the two different levels that we had. The very bottom one didn't do anything to the guy on the stretcher, but there was no detail in the spaceship. So we layered them together so that we had the poor image and the poor render on the top, and then we used Photoshop to just basically erase the bad part of the image back down to the one we wanted. We ended up with a perfect image just using Photoshop and layers, which is another new technique we're going to discuss in another YouTube video we're posting. Here's another example of using Photoshop. As we increase the resolution of it, we end up with a face on the top of the robot. We don't want a human face in the robot. And then there's a little guy on the left on the ground back there that we need to get rid of. So what we're going to do is take and put these two layers together and erase to a layer below that did not have the little guy on the left, and the robot looked more like a robot. So anyway, here we go. We're going to erase this down to the layer below, and that's gone. And I'm going to come up here and let's magnify up this robot a little bit so we can actually see what's going on here. Let's pop this thing up. Yeah, there we go. And see, it's a man's face inside, and we don't want that. We want the original robot from a lesser render. Everything else was fine on the high res, but the subtle one had the robot the correct way. So we just basically erase it back down to the subtle layer and keep the high layer as the rest of it. So it comes out as a pretty nice image. 3D modeling programs can also create what's called a VR 360, which allows you to go around in a sphere and look at an image. The problem with the 3D modeling is to create the immense amount of detail required in a VR, because most of them are 16 megapixel or 32 megapixel. They're very, very high resolution, and it takes hours and hours to render. Using Bloom on this image, you get this incredible VR image. And you bring it back into the 360 viewer, you get this incredible high resolution, high detail, impossible to render in a 3D program and get this detail with a VR 360. I mean, it took every little detail that was in that thing and really, really brought it back up. And when you look at it, it's just amazing what Bloom can do to VR 360 images. Let's take a look at a couple more just to give you an idea what they do. Okay, let's take a look at a desert scene made in View 2012. It's really low res, and we bring this in. It's amazing. It replaces all the cracks and the straight surfaces to real desert looking. The wood looks very accurate compared to what it was before. Look at these seams in the clay, and as it passes by here, it's going to smooth this out and definitely make it look like it's growing out of the mud other than just pasting it in from a 3D model. Now we need to take a look at the actual VR 360 made by this image. Okay, let's pan around this image, give you an idea what it looks like. Here we go, panning around. It's a little bit like the GoPro VR camera, but we can go back and look at all these old 3D VR images that are made that just don't cut it anymore, and add the bloom to it, and we've brought back a lot of images that we thought were going to go into the electronic round file, but now they're back better than ever. Okay, let's take a look at rocks off the beach. VR 360 made in again the program called View, and when we pass the bloom by it, it adds a ton of detail to the rocks and adds some foliage on the top. And look at the water. The water just sort of bland in the 3D program. 3D programs have a hard time doing water. Bloom has no problem doing water correctly. It does an excellent job. So let's go ahead now and bring it into the 3D viewer and just pan around as though we were using a GoPro camera or any kind of 3D system. Look at this quality. Very, very high quality. In order for 3D to make this kind of image, would literally take days to render this amount of detail, and it still wouldn't look as good as what took only about 5 minutes with Bloom. Here's another 3D model of a VR 360 of an inland beach on a tropical island, and we bring the bloom across it. What it does really well is the water and the rock walls. The trees, it does a great job on the trees too. Let's just magnify it up. Now, the thing about VR 360 3Ds is it does take an immense amount of time to get a high enough resolution to get the detail in. Bloom can do it in 5 minutes. 3D takes hours. So this, and the quality of the bloom is much, much higher than any 3D model could render. That's, of course, an issue in Hollywood. They have unbelievable 3D modeling. So we're talking about consumer here. So let's look at the VR 360. Okay, so basically we're just going to start panning around. Here we go. Look at the water. It's amazing. Even the trees, shadows, everything is improved considerably. And you can then turn this around and look at the entire scene with this VR 360. Okay, let's wrap this up with a VR 360 sci-fi scene. It's a city on the ocean, and basically we're running Bloom across it right now at the maximum level just to see what we can get. We want to get a lot of detail underneath and in the buildings. The city in the background is sort of just hodgepodge of stuff that the 3D program put together. This actually cleans it up considerably, adds lights, does a lot of work on this thing so that it looks really, really nice. And let's go in a little closer to show you what that bloom does. Look at the detail in the pilings, and it's got vehicles, people, all kinds of stuff in this scene. As we pan around this sci-fi city with the VR 360 program, I want to thank everybody for viewing this video on the uses of Bloom with 3D models. If you're a 3D modeler, you really need to look at some of your older models and get Bloom and really make some new images with all these creations that you've already made and probably now are in storage somewhere you haven't looked at in a long time. Bring them back up. It doesn't matter the resolution or the quality, Bloom will fix it. And it's just beginning. They're going to do a lot of new things with Bloom that's even going to make it more exciting with Photoshop, plugins, you name it. It's going to be really nice.